On the brink of famine, millions of Somalis do not know where their next meal will come from, and children are the most vulnerable. The death toll continues to rise from the massive landslide at an Ethiopian trash dump. And 60% of the primate species are threatened with extinction. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight with the dire situation gripping Somalia. More than 6 million of Somalis are struggling to survive each day. Their need for food aid is beyond critical as a withering drought kills off livestock. The United Nations World Food Programme warns half of the Somali population is on the verge of famine. The government has declared the drought a national disaster, and the UN says it could become the largest humanitarian crisis since 1945. The drought has also shriveled grass and dried up water holes. The nation's harvest has dropped by more than 40%. Close to 3 million people cannot meet their daily food requirements and require urgent humanitarian assistance. Another 3.3 million Somalis need livelihood support to keep them from sliding into crisis. Now the World Food Programme has started a new kind of feeding program in Somalia.
A new mechanism using a digital card, a card that we are all very familiar with in the modern economy. It's a card which the World Food Programme is loading with funds that allow the most vulnerable family access shops across Somalia. A network of 700 shops has been established.
Well, the Somali government says 110 people have died in southern Somalia in the last week from famine and diarrhea as a result of the drought. While piracy has returned to the high seas off the coast of Somalia, pirates who hijacked an oil tanker with 8 Sri Lankan crew on board are demanding a ransom for the release of the vessel, according to the European Union Naval Force. The pirates seized the Comoros flag tank on Monday, the first such hijacking in the region since 2012. They took it to the port of Alula in the semi-autonomous northern region of Puntland. The ship was carrying gas and fuel and was not registered with the Maritime Security Center for the Horn of Africa, which registers and tracks vessels in the region. That's according to the aid group Oceans Beyond Piracy. The group says the vessel was preparing to go through a route known as the Socotra Gap between Somalia and Socotra Island, which vessels often use regardless of the piracy risks to save time and cost. Not too far from there, Ethiopia has declared 3 days of national mourning for victims of a landslide at a trash landfill site in Addis Ababa. Flags flew at half-staff on Wednesday as the government announced that the death toll from Saturday's disaster had risen to at least 72 people. On Tuesday, at least 17 bodies were recovered from the site and buried at the nearby Abune Arigawi Church. Hundreds of grief-stricken family members attended the burial. Hundreds of people live on the dump site, the city's only landfill. Some of the victims had scavenged for food and items that could be sold, such as recyclable metal. The landslide destroyed dozens of homes. Well, now for more on the landslide tragedy, I'm joined by VOA's Salem Solomon. Hello, Salem.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you again. Now, really a sad story from Addis Ababa. We've been following this. Question that everybody's asking is, how did we end up having hundreds of people living right under a mountain of garbage?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, in Addis Ababa, one of the largest cities, this landfill, Koshe, it's unfortunately, despite Ethiopia's unprecedented economic growth, over 22% are living below poverty line. So that means that people, in this area, 300 people live in there, benefiting or recycling some things that they're searching for. Mm-hmm. They climb the mount. You've seen pictures of the landfill to gather things that they recycle. Some of them are homeless. Some of them are children and mothers.
And the mayor of Addis Ababa is saying he's going to move these people from there. Now, how were they allowed in the first place to stay there, and where will they be moving them to?
Opposition parties actually pointed to this fact that administration itself dumps trash in this area. They see that people are living on the edge of it or around it. And so to come and see and say that, oh, we're moving them now when this kind of tragedy happens was very controversial. But just to point out that this has been going on, this kind of accidents, a small scale, but they've had accidents in the past before. But the government is saying now that we're not really going to delve into why we didn't react,
why they allowed them to be there in the first
or to
place.
be there in the first place. But opposition members have criticized the government for negligence. We're talking about 500 people climbing the mountain to look for, scavenging for things that they can recycle, live off of it. But over 300 people live in that area. This place has been around for 50 years. 50 years. One of the victims that we talked to, a grandmother returning to her home, she's lived there for 30 years. And her daughter, just pregnant with her children, died, and she spoke to our...
So we're talking about an established settlement. I mean, if it's been all that time, the question is, does the government take some responsibility? Perhaps, have you heard anything about perhaps giving some compensation or helping these people out? Because this is where they've lived, that's home for them.
Yeah, the communications, the spokesperson for the government spoke to our Amharic service yesterday because they were getting a lot of flack for some of the comments that came out saying that it's the cause was the squatters, or some comments were coming out. So he wanted to set the record straight. He said, I was explaining what's happening on the
because he blamed the people.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there were reports that they said that they blamed the people, but the reasons are not really clear right now because there are so many other components. Some residents blame the government for having construction around that. There's a project, a biogas project, a joint project by UNDP, the government, and Addis Ababa University that some are suspecting could be the cause. It's still under investigation. There's not enough information as of now.
Are there other similar settlements around the city of Addis Ababa, not necessarily of the similar magnitude, but in terms of an informal settlements like this?
I mean, as I said, Addis Ababa has a lot of people live in the city below poverty line. If I cite World Bank records of 2015, there are less than half of the residents in the city have reliable, clean drinking water. 30% have sewage services. We're talking about people living in really, really difficult situation.
Mm-hmm. And the numbers, very quickly, you hear they're still going up, the death toll, right?
Well, some reports are saying 82, but it's conflicting. But the government said it's still 72. Usually when things like this happen, numbers fluctuate. It's still, give and take. Just yesterday, randomly, a reporter that we talked to said 20 people were found dead. So there's conflicting numbers, but they're saying it's 72 as of now.
Yeah, we just hope they don't go high, and we know there are people in hospitals. Well, thanks a lot, Salem.
Thanks for having me.
Giving us the updates. Well, Salem Solomon of the Voice of America. Now, in Northern Africa, forces led by renegade Libyan General Khalifa Haftar are claiming to have recaptured 2 key Mediterranean oil installations in eastern Libya after both sides were seized by an Islamist-led force earlier this month. A spokesman for General Haftar said Tuesday the ports of Ras El Hanouf and Al Sidra were recaptured from a jihadist militia called the Benghazi Defense Brigades after day-long assaults by air, ground and naval forces.
I say this as I stand here in front of you. We had previously handed control of the ports over to Said Mustafa Sanalla, the head of the National Oil Corporation. But this matter is linked to the approval of Parliament and the LNA leadership. Up until now, it hasn't been determined, and we can't give any information until the forces take over or the Libyan oil guards enter and take full control, and the armed forces hand over responsibility to them. Only then we will know who the leadership will appoint to take control over the ports.
Well, General Haftar and his so-called Libyan National Army back an demonstration operating from the far eastern Libyan city of Tobruk that refuses to cede power to the United Nations-backed Unity Government of National Accord in Tripoli. The stalemate has left Libya without effective governance for nearly 6 years. Many diplomats and activists describe post-Gaddafi Libya as one of the most unstable countries in the world. The United Nations says it is reviewing evidence of human rights violations in the latest fighting along Libya's oil coastline, while cautioning that conditions are likely to worsen in the coming days. Well, a new round of lawsuits filed against U.S. President Donald Trump's revised travel ban are being heard by courts across the country Wednesday, one day before the new order takes effect. Federal judges in Maryland, Washington State, and Hawaii will hear arguments for and against the new restrictions, which were issued by the administration on March the 6th. Hawaii was the first state to file a lawsuit against the revised order. The Pacific State's Attorney General says the new order will harm the state's Muslim population, tourism, and foreign students. The original order led to chaos and confusion at airports across the U.S., with travelers from 7 countries detained after arriving. The order led to dozens of legal challenges that ended with a federal appeals court issuing a temporary restraining order that stopped enforcement of the ban. Now, the new order removes Iraq from the list of Muslim-majority nations whose citizens will be unable to travel to the U.S. for 90 days and bans all refugee admissions for 120 days. During his White House campaign, Trump made sweeping statements calling for a ban on refugees and Muslims from entering the United States. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has arrived in Japan to kick off a 6-day visit to Asia, with North Korea's provocations high on his agenda. But breaking with tradition, there will be no U.S. journalists accompanying America's top diplomat on his flight. A number of veteran journalists and foreign policy analysts are registering their outrage. VOA State Department correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson got good press on his first day on the job, February 2nd.
Hi, I'm the new guy.
But ever since then, he has doggedly ignored reporters' questions. His decision to break with precedent on his first major trip to Asia, at a time when North Korea's missile tests are a major news story, has raised a lot of questions.
Well, I can't give you chapter and verse on every single trip that secretaries of state have taken over the years, but in my almost 40 years with the State Department, secretaries of state valued the press. So they wanted them along for a whole variety of reasons.
Former U.S. Ambassador Laura Kennedy said the appearance of a lack of media access is especially unfortunate since China is one of the stops.
I think a particular opportunity when you're visiting a country like China that does not have a free press, when you don't have your own very vigorous free press along with you. I think it sends, frankly, a bad signal in terms of promoting the values of a free press that is a core value of the United States.
Acting State Department spokesman Mark Toner was asked about that signal Monday.
Well, that's not what we would a message we'd intend to send.
On Friday, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Tillerson was being cost-conscious by taking a smaller plane without room for traveling journalists.
No, we don't get involved in the logistics for every cabinet member's trip, but I know that they've made aware of the concerns of some of your colleagues, and they are making accommodations in the future with respect to the size of the plane.
The State Department says Tillerson will be holding a press availability on his stop in Japan. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, will there be a Trump effect in upcoming European elections? Stay with us to find out.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
German researchers say they've developed in a clinical study a highly effective anti-malaria vaccine that could be ready for use in as little as 2 years. We made a malaria vaccine with an entirely new approach, says Peter Kremsner at the University of Tübingen. We gave the patients living malaria parasites at the same time as an anti-malaria medicine and made a vaccine that was 100% successful. In the small group of trial patients, those who were best protected got a high-dosage treatment 3 times with a 4-week break between each injection. Kremsner says his research group believes they can now carry out further studies to refine the concept and offer it for travel vaccinations, and later for use in Africa following wider field testing. Malaria killed over 400,000 people in 2015, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
I wanted to present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
Well, in today's business news, in just over an hour, the U.S. Federal Reserve will announce whether or not it will raise interest rate hikes in the U.S. Now, Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino joins us now from New York to discuss what traders in the U.S. are expecting and how it could impact global markets. Jill?
Hi. So March has been an unusually busy month with global central bankers, the Netherlands election, the Chinese Premier News Conference, G20 finance ministers meeting in Germany, and Angela Merkel's first visit with President Trump on Friday. By the end of today, the U.S. Treasury is expected to reach its maximum debt ceiling, which means Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will have to scramble to ensure the country can continue to keep paying its bills in full and on time. But for right now, traders are focused on the all-important Fed rate decision at 2 p.m. And as they say today, beware the Ides of March.
So now, what is the likelihood that the rates will be hiked, and how has the market priced this in?
Well, following the strong employment report, traders have essentially priced in a rate hike, giving a better than even chance of 2 more rate hikes during 2017, with a small chance of a 4th increase. Based on the price of Fed fund futures contracts traded at the CME, it appears the risk is to the downside should the Fed not raise rates, or conversely, if the central bank decides on a raise of more than 25 basis points. If the Fed were to keep rates unchanged, it would send a signal that it does not have much confidence in the economy, and that could cause a spike in market volatility. This particular meeting of the Fed will also be followed by a press conference with Chair Janet Yellen. That will be followed closely to see if we get clues about the frequency and number of future rate hikes.
Now, what does the Fed impact global markets when it either raises or lowers rates?
Well, most importantly, it will be the beginning of the end of the super cheap money era. The Fed rate is still the most important in the world, the benchmark for the rate on every other financial asset. If that gets back to normal, then the price of everything will start to shift as well. Expect the UK and other major central banks to follow. Other things to watch are rising inflation and savings rates, as well as budget pressures on government now that the financial crisis is largely over. Also, the dollar will rise with rates. Near zero rates have been the most important factor in the global economy for a decade. They've changed the way assets are priced, dictated savings rates, allowed governments to borrow vast sums with few consequences, and shifted the patterns of trade around the world.
Well, Jill, thank you very much, as always.
Thank you.
That's Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from New York. Well, Donald Trump's surprising victory in last year's U.S. presidential election signaled a turn to the right. Now, Europe is facing 3 critical elections of its own. On Wednesday, the Netherlands, next month in France, and later this summer in Germany. Will there be a Trump effect in Europe that puts populist candidates into power? Well, VOA's Yanni Jadwiski reports.
What I have been calling the patriotic spring, indeed.
Meet the Dutch Donald Trump, Geert Wilders. The Dutch politician sports a bleached blonde, slick back hairstyle, and he has a strongly anti-immigrant platform. His party, which is also anti-EU, may gain a significant number of seats in the Dutch parliament in the March 15th election. Holland is at a crossroads. according to Transatlantic Academic Executive Director Steven Szabo.
One possibility is that you'll see a sort of wave effect or a follow-on bandwagon effect where the populace will gain support from the Trump and the Brexit victories, or you could see a counter-reaction saying that this is not the way we want to go. So it's really an open question. I think that's what's interesting to watch, especially in the French and in the Dutch elections.
Observers say there appears to be a general anger among European voters. Washington correspondent for a Dutch newspaper, Gus Volk, explains.
The first one is sort of an anti-establishment, anti-elitist idea that people have the feeling that their country is taken away from them. It has to do with the refugee crisis that has really impacted the Netherlands as the same as many other countries in Europe. It has to do with the economic crisis that we have seen, the crisis in Greece that has not really been really resolved well, according to many Dutch voters. And mainly, I think it has to do with the mistrust in the political system, in political parties.
According to foreign policy expert Edward Joseph, many Europeans are questioning, is this where I belong? Is this still my country? He said that could be a crucial factor in the upcoming votes.
The policy that Angela Merkel has set forth, a very generous policy towards migration, this has created some anxiety among the European voter. The second problem is globalization and the related continuing economic crisis and stagnation.
And while many don't like the policies of right-wing populist parties or of US President Donald Trump, it would seem most in Europe would agree the political landscape is changing dramatically. As with the US election, many Dutch voters are wary of what polls now indicate, with concerns that they are not reliable. The results of the March 15th election in the Netherlands could be a bellwether for which direction European policies are heading. Jane Bojarzewski, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, 60% of the primate species are threatened with extinction. We'll have the details in a moment.
There cannot be a separation between the rights of patients and the rights of doctors.
Our report makes it clear that South Sudanese civilians have been deliberately and systematically targeted on the basis of their ethnicity by government and government-aligned forces.
Hamilton Live is a live audience performance. With live music, you have that interaction. There's nothing like getting that immediate feedback from the folks that you're performing to. They feel it and they respond back to you. You see it in their eyes. You know that you're connecting with them. Like if any form of communication, it's that response that you get back.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Getting on trend is not just in good fashion, it can also be good business. The International Beauty Show attracted over 500 vendors and more than 65,000 attendees looking for new skills, contacts, and products in the $300 billion industry. Bolder hair colors, men's products, and beauty appliances are featured prominently. As far as hairstyles goes, wavy is the look of 2017, while going natural is always on trend. As far as makeup goes, the word is the show is multitasking. When is a foundation not just a foundation? When it's also used for contouring and concealing. Well, next up, as more American states legalize marijuana, an increasing number of pet owners are treating their dogs and cats with cannabis. The Port for Pets trend is part of a larger swing towards treating illnesses with alternative medicines. Medical marijuana is legal in 28 states, but remains illegal under federal law. So there has been relatively little research into its potential health benefits for humans or animals. But veterinarians say there isn't enough scientific data to show that cannabis is safe and effective for treating pets. Vets themselves are banned from prescribing or recommending marijuana, and that is what is trending today. Well, Paul Garber from the University of Illinois has released a sobering assessment about the future of primates back in January. He told VOA that 60% of primate species are now threatened with extinction, and about 75% have declining populations. The only primates that seem to be doing great are us, if numbers are the judge. The threat has primatologists around the world sounding the alarm about the future of our closest cousins. VOA's Kevin Enoch reports.
The warning is stark. We are heading towards a world where there are no more gorillas in the wild. No more orangutans, no more lemurs in Madagascar.
So if we have 60% threatened with extinction at the moment, then we will see that number rise, and within our lifetimes, within our children's lifetimes, we will eradicate other primates.
Primates are the group of mammal species that include gorillas, chimps, monkeys, gibbons, mandrills, and lemurs, and humans. Primatologist like Setchell says it's clear that human activity is the primary challenge they face.
But the major problem is habitat loss and habitat conversion. And essentially it's humans changing primate habitat into human habitat, logging for timber, logging for conversion to agriculture, logging for cattle ranching, anything essentially that destroys tropical forest, because primates are largely tropical forest species.
The report and the primatologists don't have any feel-good answers about how to stop the path towards extinction.
We knew that primates were in trouble, but I think even for those of us who work in primate conservation, it was still shocking to discover quite what the scale of the problem is.
But they do point out that the most obvious solution is to slow the human advance into primate habitat. They also insist the decline is reversible if we make primate conservation and habitat conservation a priority. Kevin Enoch, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. And for more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A plate is a dish that you put your food on.
Have a lot on your plate.
Hey Anna, I'm having a party this weekend. You should come.
I wish I could, but my weekend is really busy. I'm baking a wedding cake, writing my article, teaching 2 classes, and oh, my parents are visiting.
Wow, you have a lot